science.
Suffice it that the blood of 1,000 men and women was spilled in these walls. Limbs twisted and broken. Eyes gouged from bloody sockets. Flesh burned black.
Please. No way for death. In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes. What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail.
The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Warning, the following show contains conservative posturing, radical Christian ideas, and may offend pagans, Wiccans, Islamic fundamentalists, and other unenlightened individuals. Callers and guests may be subjected to brash and offensive comments by the hosts and any other type of bullying tactics available. But that's okay. We know why you're here.
This concludes this test of the emergency broadcast system.
Tonight is Monday, August 6th, 2007.
Hello, world.
Of the Unexplained. That was cheese.
Yeah.
That was so gay.
Yeah, that's so gay.
This is Jay Scott,
This is Trent Lackey.
and you're listening to World of the Unexplained. Tonight we have with us, well, not yet, but he will be with us soon, Paul F. Eno, the author of
Yeah.
God, Ghost, and Human Destiny, Turning Home. And we're going to have him on. We'll play nice for the first half hour, and then it's just going to go crazy.
The gloves come off.
The gloves come off. That's right.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
a nice book, though. It looks good.
It does look good. It's very well written, too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
I just got my voter registration card in the mail the other day.
Really?
Yeah.
So what up?
Either this week or last week.
What political persuasion are you labeled as?
No, I changed. I'm a Republican now. I was thinking about the independent thing, but these socialists just pushed me so far this time that I've got to go all the way. All the way. 100% right to the right.
You may be an exception, actually, man. I don't know.
I don't think anyone
really
in this election is actually going to register Republican. I'm probably like the one
the
person
only one.
in the
That's what I was
state.
about to say, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're an anomaly.
I am.
Political anomaly.
I am, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's such a bad feeling towards that party, you know, after
And
old
it's not
Georgie
their fault.
Bohr.
It's not their fault that they picked an idiot for president last term, and you know I didn't vote for him. But
one of those elections, I voted for my dog. I don't remember which one it was.
Right in.
I wrote it in. My dog. Yeah.
Yeah, you're really helping the political process.
Oh yeah,
there.
I'm really just stealing votes away for. Yeah, that one vote work out well. Electoral college. That's a lot of fun too.
That's what everyone thought who voted for Ralph Nader in 2000.
Yeah, well, I
Threw it
mean,
away,
I
man.
think in
They
general
just
it's
threw it
true.
away.
You know, unfortunately, I would like a multi-party system, like not Coke, Pepsi, Ford, Chevy. You know, the way that we have it now. You know, but more
Then,
political
you know,
parties. in
You
the
and
mix.
everyone else that feels that way need to go out and do something about it.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem. What I'm saying is, they don't get enough votes to really make it. You know,
No, but it
to
does
have
screw
have
up.
a
It does
clout.
screw up the majors.
Well, that's true, but well, I guess you're right. I mean, on the one hand, it does screw up the majors, but on the other hand, Chuck's sort of right too. It steals votes away from somebody who would vote for someone else, and allows. Well, no, okay, you're right. I guess it does work out fairly well. You know, but even though that person probably has no chance ever of actually succeeding.
Let's get Chuck's vote. Who do you think's going to win the nomination for the Democrat Party?
I don't think it'll be Obama after some of the things he said in the last
really?
week or two. Hillary Clinton, I would say, has probably about a 75% chance of being their nominee. I think Edwards probably has about a 20, and maybe like a wild card shot of maybe 5% for Biden.
You think that Edwards will end up
being VP again?
Yeah.
Actually, I do think that maybe he and Hillary work something
Edwards
out,
ticket, yeah.
out behind
They've
the
given a
scenes.
little-
I'm not sure if he's
little-
going to be number 2 on it, if he's going to be number 1, and they'll sneak her in like they did for our.
You know, like a
who
little
knows?
wink, wink, nudge, nudge,
Yeah.
say no more kind of thing.
Well,
I don't know.
You saw the well, I guess it was a convention or somewhere where all the candidates were publicly speaking, and there was the open Fox News mic. Did you not see this?
Mm-mm.
And he and Hillary were having a little conversation about minimalizing the other, I guess, third-tier candidates, the Kuciniches and the Gravels. And, they said numerous times, we need to have our people meet with your people about this.
Politics, man, shaking hands and forming alliances, I do think that the Republicans basically don't have a real standout figure. I don't know. I haven't really been too impressed with many of those dudes. To tell you the truth, I did
want to bring up one real quick thing that I'm sure Chuck's heard about. Chuck, you tell me. I just heard briefly about this. Apparently, the big bridge was the story. The big bridge collapse was the story. But apparently, what had happened is they had taken a vote on an agriculture bill. Have you heard about this?
No.
And the Democrats had lost by 2 votes, and they had already slammed the gavel apparently. But then they decided they were going to retake the vote.
What?
And then, there's breaking with the House rules for over 200 years. They decided to retake the vote. Apparently, this is just what I've heard, and I've only heard it from one side, so I can't say whether this is true or not. But apparently, after that, they retook the vote again, and the Republicans lost by 2 votes, and. Like I said, it kind of broke tradition and the way that they call the votes and the way that these things are done. But apparently what this does is the addendum on this bill was going to give illegal immigrants welfare benefits, access to welfare benefits.
Oh, my gosh.
Have you heard about this?
Is this something that happened within the last 24 hours right before they were going on vacation?
No, this is something that happened, I don't know, Thursday, Friday.
Huh. No, I haven't heard anything about this, actually.
It's because the liberal media.
That's really strange.
You have to check into that. We'll talk about it.
Speaking of the bridge, though, and, it's more on topic with this show. I've been looking on the Internet. I haven't really found anything, but I'm very curious. I'm very curious if people have seen Mothman sightings prior to that bridge collapse.
I thought about that when I heard about the bridge collapse.
I haven't seen anything, and no one's reported anything, but I'm just kind of curious.
We'll get some wacko walking out of the woodwork saying, I saw the Mothman 6 times. He'll write a book. It'll be self-published, and he'll be on the show.
That's right. Well, I always like to talk about Mothman, even though terrible and bizarre things happen.
Just wait. I'm telling you. By next summer, this will happen.
But I mean, seriously, because it's in theme with that.
Oh, totally. Somebody's going to pick up on that and make a little cash.
Yeah. Or, I mean, unless it's true. People think they see a Mothman creature.
Yeah,
somewhere.
Who knows? Who knows? And speaking of Mothman, that was a good segue because our coming up guest talks a little bit about Mothman. He devotes like that much space to the Mothman.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
Like a whole palm worth of space to the Mothman.
But Scott,
what?
Who is our guest tonight?
I just told you, it's Paul F. Eno, and the back of his book says "Ultimate Questions, Ultimate Answers."
Tell us more about him, Scott.
Well. I'm going to let him do that when he gets on here.
Yeah, that's true. John Norway is calling up right now.
John Norway.
Yeah, John
That's
Norway.
Right. Yeah, for those of you that missed last week's Ron Mexico rant, you're just going to have to look because it was really, really funny. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Paul, though.
Okay.
He's been a paranormal investigator for a long time, for over 35 years. He's a graduate of 2 seminaries, and he also holds a degree in philosophy. So that means he'll be fun to talk to. He's an award-winning journalist, former news editor at the Providence Journal-Bulletin, and he's had articles in all kinds of national magazines here and in the socialist Britain. And he's also appeared on the he's also appeared on Discovery, History, and Travel channels. And he also does a talk show and presents programs all over North America. Mr. Paul F. Eno, welcome to World of the Unexplained. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Now, tell us, the first thing that I got from, seeing your website, by the way, you can go ahead and plug that now.
Okay. Well, there are several shamelessly self-promoting ones. Probably the biggest is newenglandghosts.com.
I think that's the one I linked to you with.
Yes.
Okay. But, the one thing that was really weird for me when I first went to one of your sites, I don't believe it was that one. I think it might have been another one. But the fact that you have a seminary degree and apparently 2 seminary degrees.
Well, I have seminary training, yeah. My degree's in philosophy, however, but I was about a year, maybe 2 years from ordination before they caught up with me because of this subject.
Oh, they caught up with you.
Well, people think that seminary students are of any denomination are trained to deal with the paranormal, and that's really not true.
Well, you said it says in your book here that you were in the Roman Catholic Club.
Yeah, I was in 2 Roman Catholic seminaries, and I did graduate work at an Eastern Orthodox seminary as well. So I had the two traditions.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, tell us about your first encounter with the paranormal.
Well, the first one was kind of came from my seminary training, at least at the time. And this was in 1971, when several of us from St. Thomas Seminary in Bloomfield, Connecticut, decided that we were going to go out and test a theory that maybe all the ghosts that we were hearing about, and the world culture, and every culture, every country, every civilization has this tradition of the paranormal in a way, and we thought maybe these were souls in purgatory, and anybody who is a Roman Catholic or has been will recognize that doctrine as one that is maybe of doubtful scriptural basis, but nevertheless believes that people, maybe if they're not quite bad enough to go to hell and not quite good enough to go to heaven, have to be in this place of waiting for a while. And believe it or not, that's what we were going on. And maybe these ghosts are people in purgatory.
I guess
we got some real shockaroos on this first case in '71, and it led me immediately in another direction. But where do I begin with this case? Very often people will quote-unquote ghost hunt for years and really not see much of anything. But we got a baptism by fire at this place, which was an abandoned village in the northeast part of Connecticut, all overgrown by the time we were there. Nothing but cellar holes and stone walls really left, a couple of paths and things. But we saw all sorts of things moving through the trees, bluish streaks. 7 of us were on this, 6 of us on the first trip, 7 of us on the second, including a photo expert from a corporation. And we saw faces hanging in midair. We would hear the voices of people, cows mooing, dogs barking, as if it was a normal day in the life of this old village. This most striking thing, and I opened the book Turning Home with this story, was when we were about to leave the place on the second expedition, and we heard what sounded like an ox cart coming toward us down this old abandoned cart path. And it got closer and closer, and it sounded so real that we literally got out of the way expecting some guy on a horse and a cart to go by. And it went by all right, but we couldn't see it. And we could even hear the guy yelling, "Hyah!" and the crack of a whip, and we couldn't see it, and it was no more than 20 feet away. And it showed me right away. I said, there's got to be something more to this. This guy showed no sign whatsoever of being dead, never mind being in purgatory. So that's from day one, I kind of got let off in another direction.
Well, plus the notion of the animals too. Why would they be in purgatory? Why would they be spiritual animals in purgatory?
Well, that's exactly what I asked. Why would there be? Well, never mind animals. How about the wooden wheels of this cart? We could hear that as if it was right next to us. It was like the guy was going about his normal day, and somewhere or somewhen else, and didn't even know we were there.
Well, what did the other seminary students that were there with you think about all this?
Well, aside from being terrified,
yeah.
I mean, but we discussed it later on, and we just said, what? Most of them quit right then and there. They just didn't want to deal with it anymore, and that seems to be the general attitude of most of the churches. They just don't want to deal with this stuff. And so I'm the only one who kind of went on to pursue this over the ensuing 36, 37 years. Here I am talking to you today. And in those ensuing years, it was only the beginning. I saw a number of things that, once again, led me in a direction, far away from purgatory and far away from death. And it brought me to the conclusions I have today, that death, as we understand it, simply does not exist, regardless of what the churches teach about it, because I don't think they understand it either. And it's simply a matter of a whole new understanding of what God hath wrought, so to speak. How the universe is constructed, how we see ourselves, what it means, and this is essentially what these cases have brought me to. There was a case which I discuss frequently on the air. Maybe people have heard it, but it really is the one that really rocked my world, and that was a few years after this Pomfret case that I described. just now, and I was in Connecticut. I was just out of graduate school, living in a little cottage, and didn't have anything, and was working, believe it or not, for the Connecticut Dance Theater, writing plays. And I was out of the seminary by this time. And what I was sort of doing a lot of investigating on the side, and the phone rang one day, and it was a young girl from the University of Connecticut, and she was describing the experience that she and her sister had in Maine the previous week. And this essentially was the case of a young girl who was a big believer in the paranormal and all this sort of thing, came to a house along a road in Maine as they were driving by and screamed, "Stop the car, that's my house." So out she jumps before anybody could stop her, runs up to the door, and she simply, they figured, well, she's really around the bend this time, literally, but she knocked on the door, a woman answered, took one look at her and screamed. And then a man who was in his 40s came to the door, and it was her husband, of course, and he couldn't speak when he saw this girl. The girl, everybody had the willies by this time. They'd all kind of run up. And the girl said, I apologize for bothering you, but I just feel as though I know this house. And the man said, you should know this house. You haunt it. So I said, whoa, we're going far beyond our ox cart driver with this, and I had to find out more about it. As it turns out, the young girl had dreams of being in this house. And while she was having these dreams, or at least in the same time period, these people who lived in the house would see her doing everything she said she was dreaming about. Now, as it happened, there's no reason to believe whatsoever that these people had ever met this girl. They both swore they didn't. The young girl I sent for psychological testing in Hartford, Connecticut, which was the nearest facility for the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is a pre-diagnostic tool that psychiatrists use, psychologists as well. And here we are with this situation. I mean, nobody was dead here. You had the young girl who was a student 25 miles away haunting a house in Maine.
Well, that brings me to a question I have for you. I mean, you hear a lot about these psychic imprints and things like that. Do you think that has something to do with it?
No, I don't. I think that's simply an explanation that people jump on because they don't have anything better. I think what this really led me to was what's called the multiple worlds theory of quantum mechanics, or sometimes the bubble theory of the multiverse. Okay, and multiverse is a word I use a lot in my books because it's simply what I believe I see. And the theories I've based upon it, at least for me, seem to work. Because I generally will say I'm the first one to admit that I may be wrong, but when I go into a house where there's negativity going on, if you want to call them demons, you're not going to be wrong. And these things are going on. I use theories based upon that point of view, and it works pretty much every time. We used to go charging into these cases, the negative ones, with, clergy or the Bible or holy water, whatever religion the people happen to be, and it wouldn't always work. I know that offends some people, but that's the fact. But what always works is the simplest approach. You almost think of Occam's razor. The simplest approach is usually the correct one, because you just simply take the approach of love. And I've got to tell you right now, I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. I always joke about that.
That sounds kind of liberal to me, man.
I'm not a touchy-feely guy, but I'm telling you, boys, this is what it's all about. People come together, especially families. They come together, they link arms. It's a matter of coming together and love and prayer,
so
humor.
Just human consciousness, you believe in?
Yeah. Well, this is what seems to cut off the food supply for what I call parasites. I believe these are parasitical entities. And, we're getting into really strange stuff here, but this, in my opinion, is what I see and the people who we see.
Now, I noticed that you mentioned Ed and Lorraine Warren in your book.
Yeah.
And I know you're probably up in the same area that John Zaffis and all those folks are. We're good friends with John. We've known him for quite a while.
I know John, too. Yeah, we're all in New England. Yeah.
And he's actually come down and done some investigations with us in the past. But, the one thing that I found is, one of the common things amongst the Roman Catholics, the same way John believes, the same way Lorraine and Ed, God rest his soul, believed before, was that, like you said before, that purgatory is where these human ghosts are at. And
again, purgatory is just doesn't make it, and I know that a lot of
no, I know you don't believe that. I just thought it was curious because it seems like that's a strand that kind of lives in the Roman Catholic idea.
It does seem to, although I think today most trendy priests would be maybe a little bit embarrassed by that doctrine. If you look at it biblically, the words a lot of English translations. The English translations are just hideous, and many of the English translations don't even use the word hell, but the word hell is based on the Hebrew words Gehenna and Sheol, which essentially mean places of waiting. So I suppose you could take that and argue for purgatory from that, but I don't really do that. I think that was how we started, and we kind of immediately found out that that's really not, at least in my opinion, what we were seeing.
Why did we see the Roman Catholics take such an interest in the exorcism route here recently? I mean, you see now they've got more exorcists per diocese. They've got, or diocese, I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Diocese, yeah.
Okay, but they've got more exorcists available. They've got special instruction available overseas. I mean, you should just see an explosion of this kind of thing.
Well, I'm not aware of that. I'm not saying you're right. I'm not in touch with that particular realm very much anymore. I have contact with a few priests naturally, but they have changed, I think, a little
Old
bit.
drinking buddies? No, I'm kidding. Never trust a priest that doesn't drink. Anyway, that's just my thing.
Unfortunately, I'm probably correct. But again, I don't want to attack any particular.
Oh no.
But in any case, there are, at least as I understand it, there was at least one per diocese who was trained in the paranormal, and none of the others know anything about it. I think one of the worst things you can do when you have a problem of this kind, or think you do, is to call in the member of the clergy, and I don't necessarily limit that to the Roman Catholic priest, because there are very few Protestant seminaries in which they really teach about this stuff, and when they do, it's sort of a really narrow point of view, And I'm not. There are a couple of hand-picked clergy I might have by my side, but I'm generally very careful about dealing with them. And the priests, they just don't know about this stuff, and they'll go to the diocesan exorcist, if you want to call him that, and hopefully he'll know. But the one I know the best says, well, I don't believe in ghosts, I believe in demons. And a lot of Christians would agree with that, especially evangelicals, right?
Yeah, well, Paul, I hate to stop you, but we're going to have to take our first break.
Of course.
So just hang tight with us. We're here with Paul Eno on World of the Unexplained. Give us a call, 877-SCARE-U2, toll-free in the U.S. and Canada, 877-722-7382. We'll be right back after this.
This is World of the Unexplained. We have Paul Eno on tonight. Give us a call, 1-877-722-7382. Otherwise known as 1-877-SCARE-U2. The local number is 336-996-1596, and the chat room, it's working, I assume, Scott?
It is. I'm the only one in it right now.
Right, because my invisible
I've got two links
computer.
up. I've got it to the old one and the new one, and I don't know if they're in the old one, because that's what happened last week.
Right.
So if you're in the old one, I'm in the new one. And I still haven't changed the link yet, so that's probably part of that.
Anyway,
but,
Scott, you got
tonight,
something there.
Yeah, that's 877-SCARE-U2. That's a letter U for all of you weirdos out there.
Yeah, Y-O-U.
And the number 2. Yeah, it's not Y-O-U.
People
it's
calling out
U.
the Cayman Islands for probably should.
Anyway, but let's talk about this new book, and let's talk about how it affects, the Christian Bible, specifically the Old and New Testaments. That's what I consider the Christian Bible. I'm not going to talk about like the Book of Enoch and some of these other books that didn't fit in the canon.
Yeah.
But just as far as basing it on the Old and the New Testament, what did you? I guess you walked away from this at one point. I assume that you were a Bible believing Christian, or you considered yourself one.
Well, I was a Roman Catholic seminary student, okay? And, I mean, the question is, what do you mean by a Bible-believing Christian? And I'm a conservative, too. I'm no big fan of Barack Obama. But I know he said a few weeks ago that, how did he put it, that I think he was talking about evangelicals had hijacked American religion, or at least American Christianity. And that rubbed me kind of the wrong way. But on the other hand, and I have many, many friends and great respect for that particular group of Christians, okay? They are a wonderful tool for a power for bringing order and morality to society, okay?
You're starting to sound like a liberal on me, Paul. Come on now.
Okay, no. However, but on the other hand, I mean, they don't seem to know their own history. And I have had knockdown, drag-out fights with evangelical ministers about this thing, one of whom told me outright, I don't care what the early Christians believed.
Oh.
Okay? Now, these are people who heard the gospel right from the mouth of St. Paul, and the guy doesn't care what they believed?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and you've got 20,800. This is according not to me, but to the Dictionary of Christianity in America. I believe that's what I believe was the 01 edition. No, I'm sorry, 33,000 Christian denominations. I mean,
Wow.
So is sola scriptura really the Bible alone? That particular, and I have no desire here to denigrate the Bible or to decrease its importance. Simply to point out where it is in the history of the church. Okay. And the history of the church goes way back before the so-called Protestant Reformation of the 1500s. It goes back to Jesus himself, and it goes back to St. Paul and the Apostles. And there were many versions of Christianity. Okay?
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and there were some of which believed in, or at least one of which, at least believed in reincarnation. The Bible, as we have it, did not exist at that point. Certainly, the Septuagint did, the Old Testament. But it was an evolutionary, pardon the word, process. Okay.
No, you're right.
And simply, that people do not know their own history. And they point up sola scriptura, the Bible alone, which was an unknown doctrine before the 1500s, as being Christianity, period, end of sentence, And that simply is not the case. So I kind of get a little bit miffed with people who condemn me for not espousing their religious beliefs. All right, and as soon as they hear you were in the seminary, that's what I get. And I have Roman Catholics come after me, too. And all I'm doing here is telling people what I've seen over going on 40 years of paranormal investigation and the way I interpret it. I'm the first one to admit I could be wrong, but since it does seem to work to help people understand these things, get out of the negativity, it in many cases helps increase their faith, whatever that faith may be. And again, not to sound relativistic here, but that's the way it is in this particular business. I just get a little miffed by narrow-minded people who don't know their own history and don't know what the meaning of what they do know is.
Well, get ready to get miffed. I'm
Okay, no, all right, that's fine.
I just have some. How do you know? I guess here's my first question to you: is how do you know that the things you aren't experiencing and the results you're achieving, the things you're seeing, the things you're hearing, aren't in fact Luciferian in nature, and that their main purpose is meant to confuse you or to deceive you?
That is the very first question I have asked myself from day one. It is the very first question, although I ask it in different terms, but it amounts to the same thing, that I ask myself on every single case. Now, let's get into demons, okay? Naturally, my seminary training prepared me at least for the concept of demons, and to realize that when you go into these things, it could be, it's not what it appears to be. And I always tell young people who insist on doing it. I tell people don't do it. Don't ghost hunt, as they call it. So when you go in, nothing is as it appears to be. And the second principle is people never tell you everything. Okay.
Yeah.
In these situations, and what I soon came to the conclusion, in reference to these demons, is that their theology is not necessarily the same as ours. I refer to them as parasites. Okay? Now, as the years have gone by, I have seen them at work. I've seen them act as pack hunters. I've seen them, the best word I can use is farming people. I've seen them, on rare occasions, follow people from generation to generation. I have been injured by them physically. I believe that the poltergeist phenomenon is nothing but these parasites that have gotten so much to eat, if you will, that they can play Frisbee with your fine china. Okay, well, what is it that they eat? All right. Now, I wish I could put a scientific finger on it.
Don't tell me they eat human emotion like hate and fear. Come on now.
Yeah, that's exactly
that's where we're going. I knew it. All right, go ahead.
Hate, fear, stress, division. And as I said, I wish I could put
you're sounding like
but I can't.
You're sounding like an evangelical to me. Let's exercise the demon of hate or the demon of alcoholism or the demon of drug usage.
I don't care what terms you use. Let's do it. I think these things constitute a genuine danger to human well-being. You know, and I wonder, not to get nuts with it here, but I wonder, you know, what influence do they have in the halls of government? A favorite evangelical...
obviously, you see how the system's gone now.
Okay, no, is that the ancient gods, or at least some of them, were demons, and, you know, masquerading as God. Well, you know, I happen to agree with that. Let me give you an example. Okay. The film... that came out last year with Sissy Spacek and Donald Sutherland, where the American Haunting.
Based off the Bell Witch thing.
Yes.
The Bell, exactly. Yeah. The Bell Witch, of course, being the most famous poltergeist case in American history, essentially.
Yeah.
And what this seems to be to me, and I did a lot of research in it because the producers of the film asked me to go to Tennessee. This never happened, but we were going to make a documentary to go with the DVD, and I don't think that ever happened because I was in the script, and then all of a sudden it all got dropped. And the producer had to find a new job because he hired me. I don't know. But anyway, we were going to go down there and check this out, but I did a lot of research in the case, and I think what we were dealing with here were some unemployed tribal gods, if you will, which in my terms would be parasitical entities that were attempting to feed off this community. Now, if you look at that case, they moved in on a family, and these things never start with flying couches. They start with a little bit of footsteps here and there, maybe some noise, some pounding on the walls, things just to get you going, to push some buttons to scare you or alarm you, annoy you. You start feeding them. They start getting stronger, and it gets worse and worse and worse. With the Bell Witch case, you had, in my opinion, 4 separate entities. They thought it was one at first, who would sing, you know, very pleasantly. People in the neighbors started to hear about it. They'd come over to listen to this. As it got more and more attention, more and more food, as it were, it would get stronger. It went to every single church service in the area on Sunday and could repeat word for word every sermon preached in every church. It would read at length from the Bible. And it would do all these things that attracted people. I think had this not been a strong 19th century Protestant community, it would have taken over the town. And I think that in many cases in our prehistory, and even among some tribes today, these things have taken over. How else would you get gods that demand human sacrifice? Who could love such gods? Human sacrifice, blood.
The Democrats.
Maybe it's got demon or slash parasite or whatever term you want to use written all over it. And that's what I started to see. And I've seen it happen in families. They use the Ouija boards or the whole. I don't have to tell you. You know all about this stuff, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And it seems to be how they work. And as I say, I've seen them working in teams. So absolutely, you go in and you question, what is this? And after nearly 40 years of doing it, I like to think that I picked up a few tips about what to look for, but whether it's this or not. Okay. So that's a lengthy answer to your question.
Well,
it's a very, very legitimate question.
How does Jesus Christ fit into your equation?
Oh, my oldest personal friend. How does he fit into the question? Okay, you know, God never forces himself on people. Unlike some callers to your show, I've heard, God takes people where they are, when they are, and how they are.
Yeah.
And Jesus certainly does, too. Jesus is an interesting theological guy, okay? They often will not tell you this, especially Jewish people, because they don't want to offend anybody.
God forbid we do that.
Will tell you that the whole idea of Jesus being the Son of God is wildly un-Jewish and un-Hebrew, and never, ever would have come out of that particular culture that Jesus lived in.
Oh, you're right. You're correct.
Okay. Also, they will tell you that it makes Christians pagans. Because they believe more, they worship more than one God. They're not going to expect them to understand the Trinity. Most Christians don't understand the Trinity, right?
I mean, if you take it from...
So when I go into a case, I have to consider that where people are, when they are. I mean, if God can do it, at least I can do it, right? So where does Jesus fit in? He has great power. But he has power with people who believe in him. Okay?
We're sounding new agey again.
You know, I don't go into a Buddhist home or a Jewish home and start using the name of Christ. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. You know, and with people who believe it, not with fear, but with love, that's what works. You know, it's a whole theological notion of synergy. You work together with God. I mean, that's what God... There wouldn't have been a covenant with Abraham if God didn't believe in working together.
I think him and John Zaffis would get along.
Yeah, maybe so. Now, hold on a second. Okay.
How do most of these other people get along with you guys?
I haven't even started yet.
Yeah.
We've been easy with you.
Okay, we're talking. Okay, let me back up for a second. All right, from what I understand, you're talking about the Bell Witch hauntings, and you're saying that you're speculating they're unemployed tribal deities. Okay, that's to say, at one point in time, these entities were worshipped in a tribal way with different rituals, practices, totally different cultural template, and all of a sudden they switch over because they're opportunistic, and they become, they start quoting Bible verse and singing hymns. Okay, now. How does this fit in with what you're talking about now about going, if they're so opportunistic, then how does that fit in with going into a Buddhist or Jewish home? I mean, wouldn't using one faith still work against them? I mean, if they're so open-ended and opportunistic and take any kind of cultural template, right? I mean... Yes,
absolutely. Okay. I don't think they care one way or the other what we believe.
Okay.
I don't think they care one way or the other. They are... see, the trouble here, let me just point this out right now. The trouble here is language, all right? No language I'm aware of is really quite up to actually talking about this stuff or about God even or about any of this because, we have certain baggage with every word that we use.
Okay.
Demons has theological baggage.
Okay.
That's why I use a parasite is kind of a new word for this particular thing, and I think that's why I use it, because it doesn't have that much baggage, and people from any particular group seem to understand what I'm talking about, especially people who've encountered these things, all right? I don't believe these are, in any objective sense, the servants of the devil. I mean, they are, but, I don't think that that's really how you should portray them because it's too small. I believe they are cosmic mosquitoes, life forms. I have a question whether they're even spirits. I have a problem with the whole idea, not a problem with the whole idea of spirits, but in the cases that word is often applied, I don't think it's always valid. I think these things are just as physical as we are in their own worlds, and here we get again into this multiple worlds idea. And people say, oh, well, that's not in the Bible. Well, I mean, a lot of things aren't in the Bible. Jesus never commanded his disciples to write anything. And they couldn't anyway because they couldn't write, except maybe for Luke. And so, I mean, again, not to denigrate, but just to put it in context here. So what we're dealing with here, I think, is a creation that is far, far bigger than any of us has ever thought. Okay, what is the theological reason for creation? God's love. He wanted to express his love by creating life, expanding life, multiplying. And what greater glory than creating infinite numbers of worlds instead of just one? I mean, if you want to look at it that way. You look at modern physics today, and that seems to be the kind of universe that we live in. A multiple parallel worlds, us existing on multiple levels in these things, God working on multiple levels in these things, and this is essentially what we've got. And that's why you have, experiences where you look through, as it were, the membrane, as some physicists call it, to see somebody, whether it be this ox cart driver hearing or seeing, this ox cart driver in Pomfret, or the old lady who runs down your stairs at 8 o'clock every Wednesday night and runs out the door. Nobody's dead here. It's not a ghost in that sense. It's just a person.
So a person living in another bubble world? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
So what?
It's kind of simplistic, but it's effectively what it is.
What do you believe happens to you when you die?
I don't believe that we do die. Okay, let's take it from the evangelical / Western perspective. Okay.
I was going to say my grandmother's no longer here, so I mean I'm not seeing her. She's dead.
Okay. What's the most famous ghost in the Bible? Certainly one from 1 Samuel 28, where Saul goes to the witch of Endor and asks him to call up Samuel because he didn't know what to do with the Philistines, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. The most famous ghost. And people say, wow, how? Well, there are ghosts in the Bible. Well, from the evangelical standpoint, and from the standpoint of many other Christians as well, there were ghosts in those days because Jesus hadn't come and destroyed death yet.
Yeah, the whole Sheol and the whole idea of the,
Sheol and freeing the souls. The Orthodox, by the way, have a magnificent icon of Jesus pulling Adam and Eve out of their tombs when he, as the creed says, descended into hell, which a lot of Christians don't understand what that means, but it means hell meaning Sheol, being the actual word, and death being destroyed, because it took one whom it believed was a man and found him to be God, and therefore was destroyed. Rather a magnificent panoramic view of what happened, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, you had maybe a ghost before that, and you can't have ghosts after that. Well, I mean, that's why I don't believe. I don't believe ghosts are spirits of the dead. So I don't really have that theological problem.
Well, then where do we go then?
What happens
Paul? I mean, what happens to you when you die?
I'm not sure we go anywhere in that sense. Again, language is a problem. What I essentially think is that we make our own bed in the multiverse, okay? We probably, what do things in nature do?
Guinness hot wings and Playboy supermodels. That's all I've got to say, Paul.
Swedish bikini team.
Muslim here, okay? The 57 virgins or whatever. We just don't. I think we make our own bed. If we are a selfish moron in this world, we will continue to be a selfish moron. Why? Because we are already alive, in my opinion, in millions, perhaps billions of these parallel worlds. It's all us.
But do you?
And this is what it seems to be.
But do you believe that in those multiple universes, we're all mentally the same thing? I mean, I've heard theories that, in different multiverses, Scott could be a serial killer and I could be a billionaire. I mean,
exactly.
So.
Exactly. And this gets into some rather profound ideas of how we share each other's lives and the life of God. For example, what you might point out the most misinterpreted version, in my opinion, of anything in the New Testament, and mistranslated at least, and that's got to be from Matthew, love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Okay.
What does that say in Greek? If you look at it in Greek...
I don't speak Greek or read or write it. I'm sorry.
Neither do most Christians, unfortunately, because they get a real eye-opener. Love your neighbor because he is yourself. What a difference. And I specifically learned Hebrew. I went to a synagogue in Providence, Rhode Island, near where I live, and they're wonderful folks, and they got me through some Hebrew courses, and so I wanted to read Genesis in the original. It doesn't say what it says in English. Most of the stuff we have in English, it doesn't say what it says at all in the original. That's why there are, as far to my knowledge, 18 different English translations of the Bible, and I don't know one that I send to the bank. It's they're really, in one way or another, just awful. The problem with these translations, and the problem with scriptures in general, whether it be the Quran or the Bible or the Torah or the Gita, whatever, is that you have centuries of hand copies after hand copies after hand copies. Now, you'd like to think that God, preserved the spirit of these things, but we don't know what the original Bible, for example, actually said. There are documents with the guy, the scribe, who in the early days were barely literate themselves, saying, "Why did you change the original?"
But all of the ones we've got all match.
No, they don't.
Yeah, they do.
No, sir.
Go back to the Old Testament and look at all the copies that you have that match equally.
But they don't. Let me give you an example from the New Testament. Christians are more concerned with the New Testament, right?
Okay.
1 Timothy 3. All right. You've got, let me get my Bible here. He who is manifested in the body. Okay. I've actually seen a document known as the Codex Alexandrinus.
Okay.
It's a 5th century document. I'm talking about 500, 400 years after the fact, as it is. And it really is probably generally considered the best translation. Now, we're supposed to be talking about ghosts here. We're getting into this spot. But anyway, I'll just finish this thought. When you look at the Greek letters Omicron and Sigma, it's os. It means who, okay? But you can see where somebody, in the previous page, the ink leaked, it's not even the same color, leaked through onto the letter Omicron and made it a theta. It was actually more of a dot than a line, but everybody since then has thought it was a theta, okay, letter theta, and put theta together with sigma rather than Omicron sigma, you get theos, or at least the abbreviation for theos, God. Okay? Somebody later on, a third person, put a little line over it, which means this is the abbreviation for God. It changes everything about the doctrine of Jesus. Everything.
One word changes everything about the doctrine of Jesus.
Well, whether Jesus is God or not. That's what it gets down to. And if you look at some English translations, they translate it in the original, which is who, and they translate it as God. Now, this particular version I just read from is the New English Bible, which is not the most popular.
Well, then how did this get misconstrued by the early Christians then?
Well, with the early Christians, there were at least 15 to 18 different sects, which believed all sorts of different things about Jesus. Paul came along, and what did they say in Jerusalem? They said, who the heck is this guy? He never even met the man. all right? But his version, the Orthodox version of Christianity, prevailed, and Christians like, because God willed it to prevail. But there were many, many different versions, and there was a lot of disagreement about who Jesus is, and so it's not cut and dry. It's not black and white, and the translations do not agree. Otherwise, you wouldn't have 33,000 different Christian sects.
So you're saying that all of these, that where these texts are coming from, as far as the New Testament's concerned, that none of these actually agree with each other?
Well, they don't really, and just because you have an older text doesn't mean it's necessarily more correct. All we're saying is that you.
But I mean, the reason
the reason
that we have a
original actually said.
Well, the reason that we have a main text and a canon is because all of these groups got together and decided which were the best ones, as far as which were the most worthy to be put together, which told the story the best way, which is the most possible out of everything that was put together.
Well, who put it together?
The church, the early church.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of these documents we have are newer than those. I think there are one or two that still exist that would exist at the time of Nicaea, and the rest it's a big mystery. We don't know where they went. All right.
What I'm saying is you're not going to get
Alexandrinus, which is considered the most authoritative, is 5th century.
Yeah, but you're not going to get a different. If you've got all these different readings, you're not going to get one particular piece that continues to flourish. You've got people back in 1st century that you could go and talk to that had witnessed these things firsthand. Why would they lie, or why would you get?
No, I'm not saying anybody's lying here. I'm saying you got mistakes. And during the great theological debates of the 3rd and 4th centuries, is Jesus God? Do we need the clergy? What is it for? How should the church be organized? What is this? What is that? What is the place of the Mother of God and all this?
Okay, Paul, I'm sorry.
Stop for a second.
I'm coming up on a hard break for 5 minutes. I hate to stop it here, but we're going to be back on World of the Unexplained here in a little bit. You guys give us a call. Where are you at tonight? 877-722-7382. That's 877-SCARE-YOU2. Toll free in Canada and the United States. All right, give us a call. We'll be back with Paul Eno after this. And we're back with Paul F. Eno. No relation to Brian Eno that I know of, U2 fan.
Actually, we're cousins.
Are you really?
Are you really?
He knows it. I'm told we are.
Oh, man.
Chuck's
still going, are you really?
Yeah, we're all like, That's great.
So my credibility.
Paul F. Eno. Stop, guys. Quit it. Anyway.
Not that funny.
But what we were talking about before we called you, actually.
Yeah,
so
we were talking about this.
It's like, wouldn't it be funny if he was actually related to Brian Eno? Anyway.
But
we were talking about that during the break, and I was, bringing up some of the ideas, but, behind the whole idea of all the evidence that actually is around, that Christ was who he said he was. And, how do you answer that? I mean, you were a seminary student. You did all this stuff. I mean, how do you look at some of the clues that we've got laid out there saying, well, hey, this idea of a bodily resurrection is something that the Jewish people wouldn't have taken. The idea of women being, the main witnesses to this, this tomb site being empty is something that in general wouldn't have been taken, and for this to live on in that kind of way, I mean, how does that affect your beliefs? How does that impact them?
How does that affect? I always. How does it affect my beliefs?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, evidence is evidence, but you also have the Quran, which says things about Muhammad and all this sort of stuff.
Don't get me started on those guys.
Well, I personally am a fan of Jesus, so most of the others, But all I can say is, God takes us where we are. He takes us when we are, how we are, and I assume he does the same thing with me. Jesus is my oldest personal friend. I have a lot of protection in these cases, and I give him the credit for that because, when I deal with a lot of nasty, nasty stuff, okay? Most of the cases are not that way, but many are, such as the ones I describe in my earlier books, the Bridgeport poltergeist I was talking about before, where I was actually injured, things of that kind. And you do run into these parasites very frequently. And because he means something to me, that's part of my protection. His name has great power. But again, I say, I can't go walking in there to a home where he is not believed in and start, and Ed Warren would have told you the same thing, and start using it because it doesn't fit the context. A name is a name, and the names have power, words have power, but you have to use what is powerful to other people too.
We'll agree like John and I do to disagree on that. But going back, let's get back into the book. Now, you were talking about seeing some of these ghost hunters at some of these speeches you do across the country, these young new ghost hunters. What words of wisdom or advice do you have for people wanting to get into this kind of work?
I have one word: don't. You have no idea what you're touching, what you're getting into, and what you could get into. One reason, among many, of course, is unless you have experience and, I guess, what St. Paul called discernment, you're just not going to know what is really, what is happening as far as what appears to be happening and what really is happening. You don't know whether you're dealing with something evil or not, something negative or not, whatever those words mean to you. We all know what evil means. All you have to do is watch the news at night, and you see what evil is,
Oh, yeah.
It's also because you can do tremendous damage. I find that especially in cases where negative things are going on, the family, if it's a house, is always feeding what's going on. Remember, we talked about these parasites and how they eat. And you have to get in and ask some very personal questions and kind of know how to do it in order to get to the bottom of what the problem is. And you have to encourage people to bring in faith, humor, love, anything that is positive to help cut off the food supply to these things. And, most of the people whom I've met who maybe are hearts of gold and just want to learn and everything, they don't know what they're doing. Another, I ask very many people why they do these things. Oh, we want to prove to science this really exists. That's ludicrous. I long ago gave up trying to prove anything to science. And as I say in the book, people, believe what they want to believe. And, for the true believer, no proof is required. For the unbeliever, no proof is sufficient. So you're not going to prove anything to mainstream science. One problem with science today, and I don't mean to disrespect science because I certainly respect it. I'm a student of all sciences, and it has a lot to teach us. At times, I'm very, very nervous because it's all about bucks today in science. They don't believe in this stuff except when there's money to be made, such as with the defense project. Project Stargate, believe it or not, is what it was called. Up until about 1995, maybe up till today, they were examining the possibilities for paranormal warfare. Right? $20 million according to that. So again, scientists, if there's money to be made, they'll believe in it. So with the greatest respect for science, I have problems with scientists very often, even though many of them are talking about God today. So I think you have to just get rid of the whole idea of being able to prove anything to mainstream science, because what is a scientific method? It's meant to describe a world which is essentially materialistic.
Well, it's also
not the way the world is.
It's also meant to be repeated. I mean, that's why we have, experiments. That you have to get that same
result
each time. Otherwise, it's not going to
prove your hypothesis. Right.
Well, that's true, and it's based on scientific materialism. The world is ain't constructed that way, and because many scientists are admitting that. One analogy I use is, the scientific method is like a straight ruler. And when they take, say, a basketball and try to measure the circumference of this thing with a straight ruler, you can't do it. Therefore, they simply declare that the basketball doesn't exist. And the atheists do the same thing with faith, and it's ludicrous. So I don't even try. I have several professional people who work with me, including a doctor, a psychiatric social worker, and other people who are prepared. One or two picked clergy who are prepared to come in and help when needed. But in general, there's a lot of disbelief out there and skepticism among the people who should be studying this, and it's most unfortunate.
Now, Paul, why do you call the book Turning Home?
Well, the whole underlying premise of the book is that we need to turn home, and I think the paranormal, of all things, is one of the indicators God has given us as a sort of his signature about how he's constructed the universe in order to turn home. I believe that we have, much of my early thought process on this came from, of all things, a long talk I had with an Australian Aborigine when I was in the service, and I was in Australia for 7 hours, and I spent much of it talking to this guy in the late 70s. And he really pointed out that the world is much bigger than we think it is. What you see is not what you get, and we have to kind of come together as we were in what they call the dream time, okay? You might say, from a Christian point of view, before the fall, okay? And we had a certain unity, and I capitalized the word unity in the book, to which God sort of points us. One theologian I cite in the book is Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Roman Catholic priest of some notoriety and wrote a lot. And he was not just a priest, he was a biologist, a paleontologist, and certainly a philosopher and a scholar of languages. He believed that the everything and the Bible and everything else is pointing us toward what he called the omega point, the great return to unity in God. And again, words are words to whoever is hearing them, but the concept is the same. God pointing us toward unity, and one of the pointers being the paranormal. Not just scary stories, but an indication of what really we are for, what we're all about, what we're supposed to be doing, and what it all means. Perspective is everything. When your perspective is small, narrow, what you see is what you get, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. But when the perspective is the multiverse, this huge, glorious creation that involves everything not only that is, but that could be, that was, that will be, all at once, I think that is a tremendous way to expand one's spirituality and to really come to understand what we're supposed to be doing. And the message really is simple. And it goes right back to Matthew. Love your neighbor because he is yourself. And that is, in the end, all theology ends in silence, and all we have is God and each other.
Well, doesn't the Bible talk to us about in the later days, in the end times, there's going to be an increase in interest in the paranormal?
Well, it doesn't say that specifically, but
yeah, I'm just trying. I'm trying to paraphrase. I'm trying to paraphrase.
I mean, essentially, to keep it simple, I mean, I think the early Christians, the early the precursors to the Christians, I think they knew this stuff. If you look at certain references to, well, I'm thinking of the Eastern Orthodox service at Easter time. And now it's interesting that in the West, the Eastern Orthodox are interesting people. They believe that the Catholics and Protestants are much closer together than they are to either. Okay, people think the Eastern Orthodox are just Roman Catholics without the Pope. Well, that's very far from the truth.
Yeah.
You've got an idea that really clarifies the notion of the destruction of death. For example, at the Easter services, read this letter of John Chrysostom, who was a great father of the church, and he said, and a great scholar of the Bible, certainly, and he said, Christ is risen, and not one dead remains in the grave. And these are the paradoxes that I also point out in Turning Home. You've got people lying in the grave, and yet there is no one in the grave. This is the power of the paradoxes in the multiverse. And this is pointed out in the Bible. I think the early Christians knew about the multiverse, not as such, but had acquaintance with the whole idea, the concept. People have asked me, is it possible to go into, if these theories are correct, another world, as it were, grab people who are dead here and still alive there and pull them out? And believe it or not, I spoke in the 70s with two, trying to call them shamans, I suppose, in two different parts of the world, two entirely different traditions. One was a Cree in Quebec, and the other was this Aboriginal guy. And I know everybody's going to say, oh, well, demons and all this stuff. Well, just hear me out. They said they had heard early in their own lives, when they were children, one had seen one of these people, that there had been some shamans who had actually done this. They were very reluctant to talk about it, but a family had paid them very highly and had pled with them to do it because they were just prostrate with grief over, in one case, a young child, and in another case, the father of a family, the father of a family being in Quebec. And supposedly, these shamans went into the other world, as they say they do, and grabbed these people who were still alive in this world and pulled them, body and all, into our world. They realized immediately it was a mistake. There were all sorts of interesting things that happened. But, again, more sort of arrows in the quiver of our multiverse theory, okay? I just think that when you look at the Bible, you look at any ancient documents, including the ones I point out in the book, the ancient documents that go along, that are contemporary with Genesis, the Atrahasis of the Akkadian people, and the Karsag epics of the Babylonians. They were written around the same time as Genesis, and they say the same thing in very different ways. Very interesting stuff. And all of it points toward this multiverse idea. I think that this is the way God created the universe, and not only our scriptures, if we read them in the original languages, but our experiences with the paranormal point us toward these things.
What would you say to people that said that this is bad science, a lazy way out for accounting
I think
for.
they're taking the lazy way out. Again, I don't claim to be a scientist. I never have. All I'm doing is asking questions based on nearly 4 decades of what I and others with me have been seeing here. I don't know any other way to interpret these things. And I see a spiritual dimension here that I haven't heard anybody else even suggesting. Again, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so.
Well, there we go. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so. I say the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's just the idea of a multiverse without any kind of
balance or something.
No, it's really quite elegant. There is balance, and it's an open system, seemingly. And again, it's not just me coming up with this. I mean, this is.
Oh, I know. It's an old idea.
Yeah. This is.
In quantum mechanics, not everybody believes it. Einstein thought it was too crazy. He couldn't disprove it. He didn't disbelieve it, but he just couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
And he himself said that he just couldn't believe that God played dice with the universe. I don't really see God doing that either, but I mean, it's really, we have to think outside the box here, kids. I mean, as I say, I think it's kind of the first day of school with this stuff.
Well, it's definitely it's different, but I mean, where do you go to get your proof?
Well, here we go with the notion of proof. What do you mean by proof? Proof to me, what was good enough for me, I'll tell you, was a gash in my leg from a poltergeist throwing a television set at me.
Well, I mean, evidence, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, that's not evidence. It's funny, in a court of law, I'm married to a paralegal. I know you yourself are a lawyer, Jay. In a court of law, what's the first thing they look for? Eyewitnesses. Who are notoriously unreliable, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
But somehow, when it comes to this particular stuff, eyewitnesses are never good enough. And, it's just anybody who has a paranormal experience is necessarily assumed to have a bad eyesight or to be nuts or to be on drugs. And that's just not fair.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, looking at all the other possible alternatives, I mean...
Well, for example...
Well, naturally, when I go into a case, I look at all alternatives. I try to anyway, certainly before I even assume there's anything paranormal going on. I never assume it. I always have evidence for it, I believe. For example, mental illness.
Oh, yeah.
Point this out returning home as well. I did a lot of work in graduate school in 2 psychiatric hospitals and a lot of field work. And I did that because I wanted to be able to tell whether somebody's just nuts or is really the possibility of having a paranormal experience. And the seminary I was in at the time, the faculty, believe it or not, was rather sympathetic and helped set me up with this private course in this stuff. So what I found, or at least thought I found, was pretty surprising to me. I don't know if you have ever looked into the eyes of a schizophrenic.
I see Trent every day. I'm sorry.
Quiet, you. I mean...
That's true, yeah.
The other one.
You wonder, the most knowing look can be returned to you sometimes. And I began to wonder, is it possible that these people, rather than having a chemical imbalance in the brain that is creating the illusions of what they're experiencing, is it possible that they are having experiences of worlds that actually exist? Because their condition opens doors in the mind that to the rest of us, quote-unquote, normal people are closed. And I wondered about this.
I'm glad to be closed, Paul. I'm glad.
In this case, yeah, you might be right. But there's a lot of danger with this whole idea. There are moral implications with the multiverse as well. But just to finish that thought, I've actually addressed groups of psychiatrists on this, and the fire has come into the eyes and the smoke has come out of the ears. Oh, you're going to ruin, psychiatry. Well, first of all, psychiatry is mostly pharmacological, and I would love to ruin it, but unfortunately, I have no ability.
It's junk science.
On it at all.
It's junk science. We all know that.
Well, they'll come up at the end, sometimes in private, and kind of look around and say, I've thought the same thing.
Yeah.
But they don't dare say it because of the professional fears for their own careers.
This issue of the multiverse also kind of brings up some, I don't know, one question I could think of offhand is, if in a multiverse, multiple realities, so to speak, and let's bring in these parasites, we call them demons, you call them parasites, so be it. What keeps one multiverse from devouring the rest? I mean, it seems like in our system, in our world, that things rely on that, like on a naturalistic scale. Big fish eat the little ones.
Sure.
What's the difference with these multiple universes?
I think it does happen at times. I use the analogy of the bubbles in the bathtub kind of thing for this. And again, it's simple, but it gets the point across. watch the bubbles in your bathtub sometime. What do? They move around one another. They move through one another sometimes. Sometimes they pop. Sometimes one eats another. Other times they sort of join in certain places and certain times. I think that is the analogy that best describes what's going on in most cases of the paranormal. I think in the case of parasites, it's deliberate. In the case of time slips or what have you, it's accidental as much as anything can be accidental.
So it's like Sliders with a Doctor Who bend.
Hollywood never gets it right anyway, as we all know.
Yeah.
But Sliders or Quantum Leap and all this stuff, these worlds are not closed systems, in my opinion, and in the opinion of some others as well who are more familiar with it than I am. But it's a matter of dealing with it as it comes. I often point out the Mothman.
Yeah. I know you mentioned
let's
that
talk
in your
about
book.
that for a second because
okay,
we love the Mothman here.
Yeah. All right. Now, it's interesting. Just 2 weeks ago, I was at the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. I was hoping to meet Jeff Walmsley, but he was sick.
We've had Jeff on the show, and I've actually met him personally when I was in there.
He's a cool guy.
And,
was this a convention?
So you've been to the museum?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, a very interesting place. My boys, we were on our way to Birmingham because I was going to speak there, and my boys came with me. We had a great time at the Mothman Museum. But in any case, the whole idea of this Mothman thing, which is a name the press gave this phenomenon, it wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they called it the Big Bird or whatever back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And it essentially sort of terrorized many people in the Ohio Valley in the mid to late 60s. And, I mean, who could think of something like this if they didn't actually see sort of this headless thing with wings, these two big red eyes and all this business. And the whole thing, of course, ending in the collapse of this bridge, the Silver Bridge, as they call it, at the time, and then it ended. But many people don't realize that at the time, it wasn't just the Mothman that was being seen and experienced. It was there were a number of UFO experiences, a number of paranormal phenomena of other kinds. Poltergeist activity picked up. When I was speaking down there in 2003, several people came up to me after I mentioned this and said that they remember, they were kids at the time, and they remember hearing footsteps on their roofs. And they remember seeing, red eyes looking in the window or other things that were seemingly unrelated to this Mothman thing. The Men in Black business that John Keel reports, and one or two of them said that they were actually kids when these guys came to their houses. One pointed out that one guy had asked his father for an ashtray, was fascinated by the ashtray, seemed to be unfamiliar with shaking hands and other normal stuff we do, walked out with the ashtray as though he had some kind of valuable antique or something, and it was never seen again. I mean, what the heck is going on here? And
that was very bizarre behavior, yes.
It's a possibility. You got people coming in and out across the membranes of these universes, and this UFO thing. Everybody says, well, it's demonic. Well, I don't know if it always is. I think you might have, you have visions of people, as it were, from the past through the membranes of this thing. When you have ghost experiences, well, why not people from the future as well? Because it's all one part of the multiverse, So these are all speculation, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it works.
Well, I imagine so. It brings up a lot of heavy questions. I'm sorry, Scott.
You mentioned in your book the biblical words Elohim.
Oh yes.
Now I've heard other people.
Bomb ready to go off.
Yep.
I've heard other people mention this translation before as well as being a plural for God. The I am ending leaning toward gods. And I think that most of your Christian scholars will take that to mean Trinity.
Yes, they will. As such as the experience at the Oaks of Mamre, where Abraham's sitting there and the three people or whoever come along, and he refers to them in the singular as Lord, and the word used is Adonai, which essentially means Lord, because by that time you didn't say the name of God by the time that was written. And so you've got, but it's very interesting. You have these three Adonai who come and all he sits down. All three of him sits down and has a big meal served by Abraham's wife, and it's just really an interesting. And that's pretty much what it says in Hebrew. And Elohim is a very strange word, and what really fascinated me, it's a feminine, rather masculine word with a feminine. A feminine word with a masculine plural ending. What the heck is that? It's the only word in any Semitic language that I know of that has such a pedigree, and it's very ancient. It was used apparently before the Hebrews got to the Promised Land, and it was used to describe the Canaanite gods as well. And what it means, and this is really what it means the shining ones.
Those are the shining faces?
Now, pretty much, yeah, those are the shining faces or the shining ones. And most ancient words for God or angels says something like the Shining One. The Muslims refer to the Malaika, the angels, as that also means Shining One. So I mean, it's a symbol and a concept that was very present very, very early, and it just makes you wonder. And in Turning Home, I suggest this was not necessarily God, but it was people apparently somebody dropping in from somewhere or somewhen in the multiverse and pretending to be God. And I think that in the long run, it pointed us toward the real God. But because here's where I would really part ways with a lot of, Orthodox, if you will, Bible believers.
No.
Yeah. And but again, because if you look at not just Genesis, but if you look at the Atrahasis, the documents I mentioned before, and the Karsag epics, they essentially paint a picture. If you take out the divine imagery, they essentially paint the picture of an agricultural colony. And if you want to be conservative, you could say, well, maybe it was the Indo-Europeans who were technologically advanced.
Oh, these
because they had chariots.
These other documents that you refer to, can you accurately? I mean, can you go back historically with those, as far as you can with some of the Bible? I mean, can you give me the same number of copies? Can you give me the same number of? I mean, I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, I don't. No, well, my Babylonian is a little rusty.
Oh, come on.
Oh, come on.
Okay. But again, you wonder about the translation. But I mean, when you have three documents essentially saying the same thing, in
well, I don't know if they say the same thing, Paul. According to you, you're telling me they don't. None of them agree.
Oh, I'm simply speculating here. Oh no, they don't necessarily agree. No, but I mean, when you get by, and this is my interpretation. I'm not being didactic here. This is my interpretation.
Okay.
That it just struck me as funny that they essentially use the same word for God, and there are different names, but there's the Most High. They all use the term the Most High, okay, and there are terms like Karsag and Nin-Karsag, Karsag being the male and female, who were the heads of this, if this was some sort of a colony or settlement or whatever, in a place called Ekdin, where we would call it Eden, in what I believe is the Kadisha Valley of Lebanon. Okay, I think all evidence points to that because there are extremely early, ridiculously early signs of construction, heavy construction and settlement in that area, including a reservoir and canals, okay, to feed this garden in Ekdin, which is what it's generally called in these different translations.
Now, I've got a question for you, Paul. It seems like you're trying, and I've seen the theory out there before, but it seems kind of like, to a degree, it's pointing to like an alien creator kind of theory, or a UFO creator.
Oh, no, I know what you're getting at. No, yeah. I have a problem. I mean, you're talking about the Van Daniken thing.
Yeah.
Paleo contact. I don't know if those terms even have much meaning in this. There is, I mean, you do have Nin-Karsag, this female, I don't know, you want to call it settler or researcher or whatever, taking saliva and blood, two primary DNA sources, and making man as we know him. Modern mankind, who was made as a servant to these people to do some of the work in this colony, because, I don't know, whether the Elohim had become too old or whatever. I mean, I don't know. But, I mean, it's just awfully strange. And these images exist in every single culture. I mean, you can blow it off if you want. But I think that it really means something profound kind of happened. And I don't know how much it had to do with what I refer to in the book as our primal God. I think that he used perhaps that to educate us or something, but I just don't think that Elohim was necessarily God. There was a tremendous fight in the early church, and it went on for 2 centuries, about whether the God of the Old Testament was the same as the God of the New Testament.
You still hear this, today.
Yeah, you think, it hasn't died just yet either, And you'll hear it in seminaries occasionally, and I'm not talking about the liberal places either. Sometimes there will be speculation on it.
Got to watch out for those liberal seminaries.
Well, again, God didn't give us brains in order to be robots. I mean, there are certain things I think that we're expected to figure out because it'll make us better for it. I think, and I mean, and it's just relying on the Bible. In my opinion, you wouldn't have 28,000 to 33,000 different sects all teaching sometimes the same thing, sometimes not. I mean, You need theologically, you need what this awful T-word tradition, or holy tradition as it's sometimes called, in order to clarify and put things in context. Cyprian of Carthage would say, if you're not part of holy tradition, you have no right to use the Bible.
Well, our new
understand it.
The new Pope.
Our new Pope is basically saying that. Paul, we're going to have to take our last break for the night. Hang tight with us. 877 Scare You Too. We'll be back after this.
We're here. It's still World Unexplained. Okay, that wasn't the best. The numbers are tonight, as always. Okay, quiet. 1-877-722-7382 or 1-877-SCARE-YOU2. The local number is 336-996-1596. Right now, we have a caller on the line. It's Gail. Take it away, Gail.
My first question is, since I was calling in, I didn't get to hear the last bit that you said about Elohim and how it could be sort of the plurality of the Godhead, the Trinity. Is that what you believe?
That's what I said, Gil, actually. He had a different...
Okay, that's generally... I don't get into my personal beliefs because I have to deal with a lot of different people, okay? As I was saying to the guys during the break, I try to cultivate a reverent and godly life and a rule of prayer, but I never talk about my personal beliefs, at least not yet. All right. But sure, theologically, Elohim is... Christian theologians generally interpret the multiple appearances of God, such as to Abraham at the Oaks of Mamre, things like that, as being prefigurations of the Trinity. Now, Christians have a tendency to arrogate to themselves, to tell the Jews what their scriptures mean, whether they mean it or not. All right, I think that's kind of arrogant, but I mean the Jews have a different point of view, and I think that deserves respect as well. But that's generally yes. So to answer your question, it's yes. That's generally considered to be Trinitarian.
The Jewish version is that, well, not version, but sort of the way that most Jews look at it is that Elohim is sort of the creator.
Well, it depends on which particular brand of Judaism. I mean, they are not as reluctant to have good-natured arguments about these things. Sometimes not so good-natured, And they don't lined up and defined. That they sort of rely upon the mercy of God, and to me, I think that's not a bad idea.
They sort of have this idea about two sides of God, where Elohim is sort of the judge, and then the mercy part of God is Yahweh. So that
the Orthodox tend to think that. Yeah,
that's all I was going to say.
But it is a plural word, and it's a very ancient word that goes way back before Christianity and back even before Israel too. So it's an open term for perspective.
Although it doesn't occur in any other Semitic languages, just Hebrew.
Sure. Well, it's literally translated into English. It means those with the shining faces, or the shining ones. And that particular term appears in all Semitic languages, pretty much in all cultures at that time. All right.
I'm just saying the word itself, with the ending and the...
Yeah. So,
but anyways, my question
doesn't stand in isolation.
You are speaking to a PhD Cambridge linguist, by the way. Just to let you know, there, Paul.
Yeah, it might not be fair. Yeah.
No, this is this is great. I mean, we need people like you researching things like this. But again, how far are you going to get? It's just you can speculate. You can't prove anything. They're tantalizing clues. That's all you have.
Yeah. The question from the chat room, because this person couldn't call in, the first question was the traditions of Jewish royalty, why was called Jesus King of the Jews, and they want to describe how it was that, did he rule and how, it's not an earthly sort of kingdom we all know, but you had said that was maybe an interesting question. So. Yeah, well,
it certainly is. Personally, I am of the opinion that Jesus was crucified by the Romans. Obviously, I don't know if the Jews had as much to do with it sometimes as we think they did. I think he was crucified by the Romans because they knew he was literally the heir to the throne.
Yes.
And,
they physically did it because it was the Jewish holiday.
He was the heir to the throne. They're not going to... First of all, a lot of the stuff in there really is kind of fishy. A lot of authority to do this stuff was not given to the Sanhedrin or most of these other guys. Even Paul going to Damascus, he had the priests in Jerusalem had no authority to send him to Damascus to arrest anybody. It's all kind of just odd. And Paul, my own heavenly namesake, Okay, he grew up in a town of Tarsus, if he really did, or no reason to believe that he didn't. But he was there were no Jews that I'm aware of in Tarsus at the time. There was a pagan town where Attis was worshipped, a young male god who was killed, rose from the dead, and was worshipped through bread and wine, whom they actually believed was his body and blood. I mean, is that a coincidence? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's always kind of bothered me. And I think that at the time...
Well, there are several similarities to other sort of Middle Eastern religions.
Oh, yeah, none of the symbols...
There are similar stories in Egyptian culture and other things as well.
Yeah, it's theologically, it's the fulfillment of things people believed before. You know, the Christianity is the fulfillment of many of these disjointed beliefs that existed before, and Christ brought them all together. Very prominent theological opinion. But Paul is just a very strange kind of figure, and this probably doesn't do anything to answer the poor man's question.
Have you thought maybe Paul was a parable? Just like there were many other parables and stories in the Bible that maybe we shouldn't take literally, but take as a guide. Like Paul was Saul, and he was going to crucify the people who believed. And
I just don't think he was originally a Jew. I think he was originally a pagan who was a very common thing at the time called a God-fearer.
Right.
These were people who honored the Jewish religion and honored God, but did not actually become Jews. Some of them did, and sometimes the results were disastrous. And he just seems to have an axe to grind with the Jewish authorities. When you really look at it from an objective point of view, you know, the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees in particular were a brilliant group of men who were tremendous leaders at their time. They get a real bum rap in the Gospels, and I see no reason to believe Jesus himself wasn't a Pharisee. He writes like one. He teaches like one. Paul does not. Although Paul claimed to be a Pharisee. I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that we really can't know for sure, but just that I just find fascinating to discuss.
Right.
So, but as far as Jesus being the king of the Jews and a spiritual kingdom, and Jesus being divine, that was absolutely alien to Hebrew thought.
Right.
Still is.
Oh, yeah, exactly. They're still waiting. And then the other question from the chat room was the demon legion loose in the multiverse?
Okay, well, that's more in my line. All right. These parasites, I refer to them as parasites because of just the way I've seen them work. They seem to have access to other parts of the multiverse much more than we do. And again, you know, we tend to think we're the bee's knees and we're the only critters around and, you know, we're the top of the food chain. And the multiverse has a lot of different people in it, a lot of different creatures and many different intelligences, you might say, some of which are good in our sense of the word and some of which are evil. And you could
As
say
I missed the first hour, when he says demon legion, I'm not really sure what he means in his question. You're calling them parasites. What exactly?
Yeah. Well, again, these are words. Okay, words mean different things to different people, and then we have to be careful of words. But I don't use the word demons because I think it's too narrow. All right. But again, it's words. The guy, I think the gentleman is asking whether the legion, because legion is what, when Jesus asked what the name of the demon was, he said legion because there are many of them. Because there were many, he put them into the pigs and they fell off the cliff, right? Exactly, yes. Well, it ran into the city, yeah. And that essentially is not too different from some things I've seen as far as how parasites work. Very seldom is there one. And I say they seem to work in groups and in packs, as I sometimes say, pack hunters, I'll sometimes call them. And they farm people and this sort of thing. Now, we don't know the whole story of what the Gadarene demoniac, what was going on there. The gospel always says about the pigs, and Jesus came in and, you know, kind of took care of the situation. But the background, we don't know the guy, we don't know the background. They're living in the tombs and all this stuff is all we really know. But again, I think this thing had access of other parts of the multiverse. I don't think they're native to our part of the multiverse. I think they have access to that. I've seen it many, many times. And they seem not only to feed upon certain people, here and now, if you will, but they can feed upon other people in other parallel realities. My son and I are working on several cases right now, particularly one in Vermont. We're starting to call it the haunted policeman because it involves a police officer. And there seem to be negative events going on this property in some other part of the multiverse. The thing, and in this case it does seem to be one, is feeding upon that. and is reaching also, when it can't get enough from that, into the home of this police officer and feeding on that as well. And yet, when it does, and the guy feeds it, he said, before you explain this, my fiance and I would have terrible fights, and the thing would get stronger and stronger, and stuff would come off shelves, and we'd see it literally walking around like a black hooded figure, so I mean that indicates too that they may be feeding on different things in different worlds at the same time.
Do you believe that in the multiverse that the demons that walked the earth, that were created before man, that's where they live?
Well, I think that there, in my opinion, in my experience, there are 7 or 8 different species. Okay, and again, I think they are living beings. I don't believe necessarily that they are spirits in our classical sense of the word. I think they're just as physical as we are, at least a lot of them. And I think that, as far as when they were created, I mean, you're dealing with a multiverse in which time means absolutely nothing. Past and future exist as a function of our consciousness, and time really doesn't exist. And I think it was Einstein got into that. I don't think these words really have a lot of meaning. Our problem is that they do exist, and if we aren't careful, they can influence us in a negative way and have access to us, and even can influence our societies and our governments. And that, to me, is the scariest thing I've ever encountered in the paranormal. I think we have to be aware of them, whether you use the name of Jesus or ISIS or whoever. You can say what you want. It works if you believe it.
So, Gail,
it doesn't work if you don't.
Sorry about that. Gail, do you have any more questions?
No, that was it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Gail.
Bye.
Thanks so much,
Wow.
Gil.
Interesting.
Good stuff. Well,
oh my gosh,
Paul,
man.
it looks like we're at the end of our rope here.
Gosh.
We're at the end of our rope.
Already.
Losing our religion, as we say in the South.
Already.
I'll give you the last word. Well, before our last word, but there goes the phone again. We'll wait and see who that is. But go ahead and get into your closing argument, for sake of a better term.
Well, it's not an argument. It's simply an observation that, and I always like to end on a positive note, because I believe that there are far, far more helpers, if you want to call them guardian angels or whatever term you want to use, in the multiverse than there are negative entities. I think, God never gives you more than you can deal with.
I've got a caller. This is Rich Anders from Georgia. Rich, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm getting very curious about your guest.
Well, good.
Oh, hi there.
I'm doing fine.
Hey, well, what can we do for you?
I'm just very confused about the things he says about. He seems to be an expert on divinity and godliness.
Hey, Rich, could you turn your radio down there, buddy?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Is it okay like this?
Yeah, it's great. Go ahead.
Well, he knows so much about God and about Elohim, and it's all very confusing. I would like to get the whole thing from the past into the present. So if God appears in this world, what would he expect him to look like, how to behave, and what to do?
Well, I mean, again, these are what's called in theology anthropomorphic terms. We try to, in order to understand God, we try to make him like a man. All right. And
well, that's a good beginning. I agree with it. So that's a good beginning.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the early experts, fathers of the church, as we call, said, we can really only know God by analogy. We can't really say what God is, what God does. We can say, God is like this, or this is the lesson for us here. How did Paul describe love? He described it by describing what it is not, So it's the same idea. We describe God by what perhaps he is not, and we realize that we're just using words, and words can only take us so far.
Well, Paul, excuse me if I interrupt you. So if God steps up to you and says, "Hey, Paul, hi, I'm finally back on this planet. I'm in this world. I'm God, and I would like to talk to you about the variety of topics that are interesting for me." So what would you say to him?
Okay. What would he look like? I have no idea, but I suspect...
Well, let's say he looks like a distinguished elderly gentleman. Well, because, in the Sixtine Chapel, you see God floating on the ceiling, and he doesn't really look so good because he's pretty fat. So, but let's assume it's a good-looking elderly gentleman would you think he's the Antichrist who is tempting you like Jay would? Or would you, or would you say, okay, let's give it a shot?
Well, I mean, looks, things are never what they appear to be. In the Sistine Chapel, I mean, there are canons.
Wait a minute, Paul. Rich, are you claiming to be God again? Oh, yes, he is. I didn't know.
My friend, far from it.
Did I not call it? Did I not call it?
Wow.
Chuck, you called it from the beginning there. I wasn't following it, but Chuck called it.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
man.
guys. I'll let y'all continue. Go ahead.
Okay, well, you're speaking from one framework, and I'm hearing it from another. There are laws. There were laws in the early church called canons. Things you're supposed to do day to day, and things you're not supposed to do. And one of them is you do not depict God the Father. You do not draw a picture or any kind of statue of God the Father. Certainly, in the version of the commandments used by the most Christians today, that you're forbidden to make an image. So I just don't approach God that way. I mean, you stand in humility, and God is above all humble. I don't often think of that, but it's
How
true.
do you know that? Maybe he's arrogant because he has so much power, and he says, I'm God, and he's very conscientious of it, and humbleness is something that I would say is alien to the nature of a God who is almighty.
What?
That's my assumption.
Being humble?
Yeah. Humble is for people who have no power. People who have power are not humble.
That's why I'm not humble, Rich.
Yeah, but I mean, I just don't see him as a man. That is so little.
Why?
Why?
Jesus was a man. So he's
I'm
the son.
you're talking about the Godhead as such.
No, I was talking as assume Jesus comes in this world as a man. He steps up to you and says, "Listen, I'm God." So what would he expect him to
He never
look
said,
like?
"I'm God."
Huh?
He never said, "I'm God."
Yeah, that was a mistake.
He said he was the Son of Man.
Well,
He also said he was the son of God.
he didn't want to scare people. That was all. He teased
He
the
didn't
Son
want
of
to scare.
God.
Well, but you certainly know more about him than I do.
Pardon me?
If you can say these things, I think that I don't know how to ask. First, I was prepared to talk about ghosts tonight, and we're getting into some deep theology.
I apologize, Paul. It got way out of hand.
All right.
Whatever you start, Jay always goes into this direction, but there's something else. Let's go into a different topic. You mentioned the term multiverses, and
Yes.
you seem to know what's going on over there.
Well, I don't know. All I'm saying is that this is what I have seen over all these decades of working with this. This is how I interpret it. And I ask the questions. I just ask questions that have come up, and I rely in many cases on people who are far more competent than I to answer them. I can't answer the medical questions, for example. For example, I have a question. What these parasites seem to thrive in environments not just with negative people, but with certain kinds of electromagnetic fields.
What do you call parasites? That's interesting.
I'm sorry?
It's interesting to know who or what do you call parasite?
Well, I think they would be referred to as demons theologically, although I don't think they have the same theology as we do.
Rich, I hate to do this to you, buddy. We're gonna have to cut you off, though. We gotta get out of here.
Well, I got a good laugh. That's enough.
Okay. Have a good night, Rich.
Bye.
Same to you. Bye.
That was Rich Anders,
yeah.
one of our favorites from Georgia.
Yeah.
Anyway, Paul, I'm gonna let you have the next 2 minutes here before we have to split.
Okay, well, I would just repeat what I started to say, that the whole message here is really a very simple one. As some of the early fathers of the church said, you stand in silence before God. All the theology ends, and it really does come down to you and God, And I think that the message here is that there is far more good in the multiverse than there is evil. I think that we have a lot of help. I think certainly... Jesus, you cannot ask for more power than that. And I think that the message is, we end up really, after all the speculation, with just each other and God. That's essentially what and the message is we need to take care of each other. Because, God is pretty much given, that's what he's given us, is each other,
The book is...
theology just ends.
The book is God, Ghost, and Human Destiny, Turning Home by Paul F. Eno. And Paul, give us your website one more time.
It's newenglandghosts.com or footstepsintheattic.com.
All right. NewEnglandGhost.com
nicely
or
named.
FootstepsInTheAttic.com. Paulino, thank you so much for being a guest
Thank you,
tonight.
fellas. It was a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you,
We'll
Paul.
definitely have to have you back.
Yeah.
Anytime.
All right, take care.
Okay.
And that was Paulino and Rich Anders and just a whole multiverse of people.
A multiverse. One of the multiverses we never talked about, really,
Wow.
was ghosts.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm sorry.
not at all.
I was trying to
Not
turn
at all.
it back that way, man, and
Yeah,
it kept
just swept.
It kept turning back,
the
other way.
I don't know what to say. I mean, there was a lot of.
You can't argue with the guy on this whole multiverse thing. I mean, because it's real circular. You know, I mean, anything's possible, and I mean, what do you think, Chuck? I mean.
I do think that, chaos theory and some of the stuff is a cop-out to an extent. I mean, it depends on really how far you're willing to take the research, I think.
Trent?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, the whole notion of that we're on multiple planes doing different things at the same time, it seems kind of... Well, it seems kind of redundant. I mean, if such a multiverse really existed, I think it'd be vastly different from one point to the next, and we wouldn't be in those places. That's just me. I mean, it's like the third dimension, the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension.
How do you back it up, though? I mean, there's no evidence at all.
There's
I mean,
really
that I
no
can
way
see.
you can prove it. I mean, it very much is a matter of, well, I just believe this is the way it is.
And you're shoving it into a construct of a third dimensional or fourth dimensional being with our limitations as a species or mental capacity.
Well, there are limitations of being able to describe things. I don't know.
That's right. That's why we have sliders and Quantum Leap and Doctor Who. Anyway.
Although Doctor Who's...
No, anyway. We got like 20 seconds. So this
we?
is Jay Scott, your only JD DJ on the Omni Sound Radio 1 Network, saying see you next week with Jesse Marcel Jr. So
this
check that
is
out.
going to be fun. This is Trent Lackey. We're coming to you in this multiverse, Kernersville, North Carolina, where we are a small town, and we talk about big things.
Chuck Browder.
Take it away, Lil John.
Yeah!